I'm Nikolaj Coster-Waldau. I'm an actor. I'm also a Goodwill Ambassador for the UNDP. And I've been that for 5 years. One of the first trips I went with the UNDP, we went to this local office. And I was talking to all these amazing people who work for the UNDP and asking them questions. And I realized that every time I asked a question, they said, yeah, I used to be here and I was doing this. And then the other person would go, really? I didn't know that. And back then I had the idea, well, hang on a second, maybe you guys should talk together because you have so much knowledge that this pool of passion and wanting to make a better world. So then my good friend Mick told me about this project he had that was called Mindpool, which is about collective intelligence. And then through me, Boaz met Mick, and then they came up with this incredible idea, which is this global Mindpool. And I'm talking too much now because you're supposed to give us questions, but Boaz, take it from here.
Thanks so much. Yes, at UNDP, we launched a campaign, a public-facing campaign, a behavioral change campaign on Wednesday, the 27th of October, so just a few days ago. The campaign is called Don't Choose Extinction. If you haven't seen it yet, I urge you to hashtag that. And the campaign really revolves around the idea of engaging with people all over the world in an effort to move the conversation on decarbonization and moving away from fossil fuels in a substantive way. But there is one kind of outstanding issue that we need to deal with in this whole melange of issues, which is fossil fuel subsidies. There's $423 billion a year that are used for fossil fuel subsidies, and most of that money goes to manufacturers. That means that it doesn't actually get to poor people. It doesn't get to the disenfranchised. It doesn't get to where people really need it. It goes to manufacturers. And so it's extremely important as we move through Glasgow and as we move through the next few years that we get this one issue right. It's not the only issue, but it's a good start for us to really start moving the conversation along. And we wanted to spark a global conversation. But these issues are complicated. Many of us don't, even I didn't even know about this issue before I started working on this campaign a year and a half ago, that this issue actually exists. And we needed to find a way to connect to people and have those people then connect to a debate, to a larger debate around the world, and perhaps, if we're lucky, influence policymakers. So that's what we did. On Wednesday, we launched Don't Choose Extinction. We went at it a little bit of a funny, slightly absurd way in order to reach people. So the film that some of you may have seen, others, again, I urge you to watch it, has a dinosaur barging into the General Assembly in New York, the headquarters, and giving a speech. And in that speech, he basically asks us not to choose extinction, to change our ways. He says, we had an excuse, a giant asteroid hit us, and you don't. You don't have an excuse, you're doing this to yourself. And that's what we're urging here, that we don't have an excuse not to act. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make this campaign as big as possible. We're trying to reach as many people as possible, but in a meaningful way, because we want people to connect, and we want people to connect through a series of actions that they can take. One of the actions being a collective intelligence that my friend Mick has designed for us.
And what is that, Mick?
So, as these guys mentioned, it's a platform where we want to get the crowds of people globally, hopefully, to take part in the conversation and hopefully start coming up with ideas and predicting outcomes in local places. And all of that data goes directly to the UNDP. And with their network, we can hopefully put, I don't know if I'm allowed to say pressure, but at least influence politicians with something that they are insanely interested in, and that is the public opinion. It seems sometimes like they're not interested in doing much else, but at least public opinion is what gets them elected. So if we can spark a conversation, if we can get people's input, and if we can show the politicians how the people are reacting and experiencing the climate change, then hopefully we can help them do something better on this planet.
Great, so we can go into questions now. So if you just want to raise your hand and then I can pass the microphone. Great.
Is it a new technology? Can you explain how it works?
It's so collective intelligence as such is a topic that has been a scientific topic for many, many years. There are amazing results, and it's not something new. It's something that organizations and companies and everyone have been using. So technically, you can say collective intelligence is democracy or whatever. It's every time we do something together. But the technologies has developed, so now we have machine learning and algorithms that can find patterns. We can do sentiment analysis, do NLP, natural language processing. We do all these things, and we have obviously algorithms and the back-end tech to do that. But the input really has to come from the people. One thing that we focus on a lot is the tacit knowledge, the gut feeling and the intuition, and not necessarily the rational knowledge, because the rational knowledge is easier to get your hands on. You have analysts and all kinds of surveys to get that. But the experience of climate change is what really important, because the experience and the emotional part of your system is what makes you vote on politicians. It's how you spend your money. So the understanding and the intuitive feeling of being a person on this planet is a very important fact.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. When I understand it correctly, your first goal is to get rid of the subsidies for the fossil fuels. What I would envision is that if we achieve this goal, then prices go up for the consumers, because companies will try to get that money elsewhere. How are you planning to tackle that information for consumers? Because it's a very complex field. If you think of renewable energy, clean mobility, how to convince consumers to go that route?
So from our perspective, there's there's $423 billion in fossil fuel subsidies that were paid last year. Imagine what we could do with those funds if they were used for positive impact rather than negative impact. We feel that we're in a deficit of $423 billion in negative impact to the planet. So imagine what we could do. If I could just give you an example, if we created a universal basic income, we could then offset the price of fuel that's going up as opposed to what the universal basic income is. So for instance, kind of like if your price of fuel goes up by $100 a month, you could get $100 from your government to offset that using those same funds. So if you took the fossil fuel subsidies away and put it back into society rather than spend it on other things, then there's a net positive here for the planet and for people. What we want to do, there's not one solution that fits all, but what we want to do is help countries through this transition. It's a complicated issue, there's no doubt about it, and there's different solutions for different countries, but what we want to do is first of all spark a global conversation. We want it to be out there, we want it to be on the COP agenda, we want it to be discussed amongst people, but amongst policymakers as well, and we have some solutions. UNDP put out 3 papers on Wednesday as well, one of them about carbon pricing, one about fossil fuel subsidy reform, and one of them about what we could do, repurposing those funds, how we could use them. I'll give you a couple of examples. If we were to give sustainable energy for all, for everyone in Africa, every single citizen in sub-Saharan Africa, it would only cost us $36 billion. We are talking about $423 billion. So there's so much impact you could have. You could vaccinate every single citizen in the world against COVID-19 4 times over with those funds. You could raise the minimum amount of how much people are living in extreme poverty. That's $1.9 per day. That's the extreme poverty line. You could raise that to $3.9 a day. So what we're saying is, there's not one solution that fits all. We know it's a thorny issue. We know that it's difficult, but we need to move in that direction. Be it today, be it tomorrow, be it next year. At some point, that conversation needs to happen. We want to spark it.
And also, I want to say we just went through a digital revolution. I guess a lot of us remember when we got our first modem and we figured out what this internet thing is. And now, 25 years later, the world is very, very different than it was 25 years ago. Now we're on the brink of what we can call a climate revolution or an environmental revolution. The difference is that the digital revolution came from a nice to have. We invented new technologies that made everything easier. Now it's a need to have. Now the planet is going under. Our kids' future looks very different than ours did 25 years ago. So we are heading for a sort of revolution or a major change. I'm pretty sure that nobody in here thinks that we'll buy a gasoline car in 10 years, or maybe we won't even eat steak anymore. There are so many changes that will seem like the time when you smoked cigarettes in restaurants. It's just ages ago, and it seems so weird now. So this change will happen, and it costs a lot of money. Fossil fuels are one of the biggest routes to all these problems, and still we are subsidizing it with 423 billion a year. That is insane. So we need to do something. And obviously there are costs, there are industries that hopefully won't be here anymore in 20 years, and that costs money, and somebody will lose their job, but hopefully they'll find a job in the green sector, and maybe we can use that money to invest in renewable energy and do something good for the planet.
But also the thing is, this is all about just creating dialogue. You know, I didn't know about the $420 billion until we started this campaign. The number is so insane that you go, how did we not know? I'm sure, did you guys know that? I didn't know. And it goes back to the 70s, the oil crisis back then, and that's when the subsidies happened, and then they were never taken away because there were a lot of interest in keeping them. So it's one of those things where we know we have to transition away from fossil fuels. It's a fact. So why not just take this money and use it for that transition? At least start the dialogue. But obviously the UNDP is not a political organization. It's for every country in the world. It's about discussing these things.
Great. So we have time for a few more questions. So if you just want to raise your hand, we can pass the microphone.
Thank you. I think that one of the major issues concerning the climate change conversation is that only the Western world is willing to have the conversation at all. So how do you get the Eastern world that is responsible for the majority of the issue to want to be part of the conversation and part of the solution?
I don't know if they are responsible. We are very responsible here as well. But I think that's one of the things that we talked about on stage is that if you can drag people to the table, to the negotiation table, at least you can spark a conversation in the population, because politicians are depending on the voters. So if we can spark that conversation and slowly get people to understand that this is a real issue, and it doesn't matter if you're from Brazil or China or Denmark or Portugal, it's a very common problem. It's the planet we all have to live on. And some people will, be flooded and die, which is obviously horrible, but the rest of the world will be impacted as well. So we all need to do something.
It's a global issue. We are not here to point fingers at anyone. We are here to have a global conversation about a global issue that needs a global solution. Everyone needs to be part of this in some way or another. It might be that that there's countries that are bear more responsibility for it and then need to take more of the responsibility now, and then others. But we're not saying that. All we're saying is that we have some solutions. We want to help countries along in this transition. We want to make sure in that transition that no one is left behind. That the poor, the disenfranchised, the people who don't have anything, the people who are living on $1.9 a day, that we bring them along with us. So it's not only a green transition, it also reduces inequality at the same time, and it's possible to do. And so as we kind of bounce back from this pandemic, as we rebuild, trillions of dollars are going into the economy. This is a time to make bold choices. It's a time to say, enough, we're not going to do this again. We want a better future. We want a greener future. We want a sustainable future for all. Not for a segment of society, but for all of humanity. And it's important that we take those bold choices now as we move through this time of extreme need for action in the climate space. We all know that. We all know that we're running out of time. The science is clear. It's time to take action. What we want to do is support that action. We want to support that conversation. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to spark that big global conversation about it.
And it's been really interesting doing this project. We did it with Wunderman Thompson in Australia and Activista in Los Angeles. We're from Denmark. So we had this almost a global setup. So all the conversations were really interesting to follow every time something happened. Obviously, we talked together almost every day for a year and a half. So it's been funny to see how this global setup could build a global campaign and hopefully come up with some solutions to really global problems.
And one last thing I'll add: that the dinosaur now. Well, you have. I don't know if any of you have seen the film, but the dinosaur is in 36 languages right now. We have the film translated to dubbed into 36 languages, many more in subtitles. We truly believe that our campaign is a global campaign. It's infinitely translatable because it's a voiceover, but it's also infinitely translatable because we're trying to reach people with a simple message. It's a very complicated, serious issue, but it's a very simple message. So we feel that we can reach people all over the world with activations all over the world that will speak to those people. We've built also a very wide and deep digital ecosystem behind this campaign. Mindpool is part of it, but we also have other actions that people can take, and we hope that those actions talk to people of where they are. We can't build a website for 7 billion people, so we've tried to design actions for as many people as possible. So when you enter into the space, www.don'tchooseextinction.com, you are prompted to not have an excuse. The dinosaur says, what's your excuse for not taking action? We say there is no excuse. Everyone needs to take some kind of action. And so we've tried to design actions that kind of somehow correlate to people all over the world in different parts of the world. So they can, one person can do this and another person can do that. We've got a vast variety of action. It's a very, very rich ecosystem that we've built that allows people to really take action. All of that work was done by Wyndham and Thompson in Australia to really build that very, very rich environment. Long answer to a simple question, sorry.
So we have time for one more question.
Hi. I would like to ask you, how are big companies taking this message? Are they supportive of the work you're doing? Are they by you?
We've had some very interesting conversations with big companies, and some of them are supportive. I'm sure that some of them aren't. But that's still okay. We don't all agree here. What we want to do is have a conversation. We want to open that discussion up. We have member states that are supporting this campaign, member states that have endorsed it. There's a group of of countries called the Friends of Fossil Fuel Subsidy Reform that includes Denmark, Sweden, Costa Rica, Switzerland, Netherlands, New Zealand, that have actively supported the campaign and endorsed it. There is other member states that have endorsed it. There is lots of NGOs, civil society organizations that have endorsed it, and some big companies have said yes, this is the right thing to do. Others might have a different opinion, but we want to have that discussion.
And also, companies are made out of people, and that's also the point. We want to reach as many people as we can all over the world. Because, as you said earlier, we live in a time with a lot of pointing fingers at everyone and saying, well, if you eat meat, you're a bad person. If you do this, the fact is, we kind of know what the big issues are, and the big issue really is fossil fuels. It's was it more than 80% of CO2 emissions comes from the burning of fossil fuels? We have to deal with that, and that, regardless whether you live in China or here, it's the same issue, and people have power. There's power in numbers. And I know that we did another campaign a couple of years ago, which has a very positive thing, where the employees at that company were so excited about it because they felt like, oh, this is good. Because the thing is, because if you work in the fossil fuel industry, this worse or better than we are. I mean, it doesn't make you a bad person. If you've been in a coal mine your whole life, and now suddenly you have to transition away from that, obviously we have to make sure that you have somewhere to go. It's a complex issue, but we are in this together.
Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you so much.
Thank you.